Imagine the following scenario. You're living in Seattle and looking to pick up an EM1 Civic Si. EM1s are getting pretty hard to find these days, and they tend to cost upwards of 10 grand if you do find a clean one. But maybe you've noticed that when you expand your marketplace searches just a few hours north to British Columbia, 6th Gen Civic Si's are going for considerably less. Deciding it's worth your while to import, you head up to Vancouver to have a look at one. Curiously, the SI badge isn't red, and you immediately notice the lack of alloy wheels, and after popping the hood, your heart sinks lower than the ride height of a Prelude when you realize you just drove all this way for an EX. Angered by this, you demand to know why this hoser is misrepresenting his car. Where's the B series? To which the Canadian replied, I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't an SIR. You see, this friendly Canadian wasn't misrepresenting his car at all, and a situation like this actually happened to me years ago when I was selling my Canadian Civic Si. So don't be like Marcus from Seattle. Watch this video and learn all the things you probably didn't know about Canadian spec Honda Civics.
Can you relate to good looks? Can you relate to anti-lock brakes and a driver's side airbag?
So for the 5th gen, let's start off with the hatches. Now here the trim badging is pretty much the same. The basic economy model for both markets was the CX, although in Canada, the CX had the 102 horsepower D15 B7 shared with the DX model, as opposed to the US models, which had the 70 horsepower D15 B8 in the CX. It was also possible to get an optional automatic transmission on the Canadian CX, and the auto package would also give you power steering. The second hatch trim was that crazy fuel economy model, which I guess sort of replaces the CRX HF. It had the 92 horsepower D15 Z1 economy VTEC engine and was badged as the VX in both countries. I'm not aware of any differences on that model between the two markets, except for that the VX was discontinued in Canada after 93, so we only got it for the first 2 years. The DX trim again was the same between both countries, but was not available in Canada for the final 95 model year. Now the model that everyone really cares about is the SI hatch. And for this generation, unlike the next two, it is pretty much the same between both markets, with the SI using the 1.6 liter D16 Z6 VTEC and badged as an SI in both countries. The only thing is we did get a little ripped off in Canada because this model was discontinued at the same time as the VX model after 93. So again, with only a 2-year run, these are pretty rare up here these days. As you may have noticed, by the time the final 95 model year came around, the only hatch we had left in Canada was the basic CX model. Moving on to the sedans, US trim levels were DX, LX, and EX. Trim levels in Canada were LX, EX, and EXV. Now the trim levels were all pretty much equivalent, meaning the top level sedan was basically the same in both countries, it's just that they were named differently. Essentially, Canada just didn't use DX badging for sedans. So for example, if you bought an LX in the US, that's the mid-trim level. But an LX in Canada is the base model, equivalent to the US DX. And the top sedan in the Canadian market is the EXV, but again we only had that one for the first 2 model years. Now moving on to the coupes, both countries had the same base model, the DX. Yeah, it's only the sedan that Canada doesn't use DX on because reasons. Neither country uses LX badging on the coupes though, so the next step up for the US market was EX. But for the Canadian market, there was no EX coupe. It was badged as an SI. And here's where things could get confusing. One might assume that Canada's SI coupe is directly equivalent to the SI hatch, but it's actually more equivalent to the US EX coupe. But both the EX and SI coupes do share the D16 Z6 VTEC engine from the SI hatch and most of the other SI options, they just lack the rear disc brakes. So it's not totally crazy to call this model an SI. Unlike the hatch, the coupes had power steering and you could optionally get an automatic. But you shouldn't. The US EX also adds power windows and door locks, but Canadian SI models do not. Locks and windows are manual, because weight savings, bro. It's an SI! So I guess technically the Canadian SI coupe is slightly closer to an SI hatch than the EX is. But then again, EX sedans use the VTEC engine as well, and they could actually be optioned with 4-wheel disc brakes and ABS, so are they actually the GOAT? At the end of the day, this is just a badge. So when in doubt,
pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
Pop the hood. This will decimate all.
One pattern you're going to notice here is Canada is not using EX badging on coupe models, and this is what will start to make things a little more confusing when we get to the 6th gen coupe. For the 6th generation, I'm just going to gloss over the hatches because they were pretty much the same between the two markets. Trim levels were CX and DX and they were pretty basic. They used the non-VTEC D16Y7 and were sold as economy cars in both markets. Canada did get a special edition though in 2000 that gave it a few upper options like body-colored mirrors, attack, and alloy wheels that were very similar to the Integra GS wheels of the era, although the Civic ones were 14-inch, not 15. Now let's talk about the sedans. Once again, US trim levels were DX, LX, and EX, and in Canada, trims were for LX and EX. Yeah, we get it, and the top Canadian sedan trim was EXV. Well, actually no. If you wanted a fancy Civic with top trim level amenities in Canada for the 6th gen, you had to buy a whole different car. The Canadian exclusive Acura 1.6 EL now filled that spot in the market. And as you can probably tell by looking at it, it was a fancy Acura Civic. It had all the US EX Civic amenities like a sunroof, CD player, keyless entry, and the single overhead cam VTEC D16Y8 engine, as well as some stuff you won't get on any Civic from this era, like remote trunk access, heated mirrors, and optional leather interior with heated seats. It also had a unique dash and different colored gauges. And if you'd like to learn more about the EL, well, I've already done a whole video on them. Canada did get a special edition sedan for $99 and $2,000, which took the LX and gave it a few of the EX options, but not all of them. For coupes, the base model again for both countries was the DX. Like the other DX models, it used the non-VTEC D16Y7. Both countries also had the high efficiency model again, this time as a coupe and badged as the HX. It used the D16Y5 economy VTEC. For the US, the next step up was the EX, which was equivalent to the US EX sedan, using the single overhead cam VTEC D16Y8. And then of course, starting in 1999, we got the glorious EM1 SI, with the dual overhead cam VTEC B16A2, and all of the other upgrades like 4-wheel disc brakes, special alloy wheels, upgraded suspension, different color gauges. Chances are if you clicked on this video, you probably already know what the EM1 is all about. Okay, but what about Canada? We've learned that Honda Canada doesn't use EX badging on coupes, so as you might have guessed, like the previous generation, the Canadian EX coupe was badged as an SI, and it didn't lack the power windows or door locks this time. It had everything the EX coupe had, plus standard ABS on both transmissions and heated mirrors on 99 2000 models. And like the EX coupe, the D16Y8. They're a nice coupe in their own right, I used to own one, but they're not an EM1, they're an EJ8. In 1999, when we got the EM1, it couldn't be badged as the SI, obviously, so it became the SIR, and it's completely equivalent to the US SI, except for we got standard ABS and heated mirrors, and we did get one extra color, Vogue Silver Metallic. These 6th gen SI market differences are where I see most people getting confused, and not just Americans. A lot of Canadians don't understand this either. As a matter of fact, at a dealership I used to work at about 8 or 9 years ago, I actually had a customer come in who had purchased a used 98 Canadian spec SI from us and accuse us of selling him a fake SI because it didn't have the B series. I had to show him this Wikipedia article to get him to believe me. But the whole time I'm thinking, bro, you didn't pop the hood before you bought the car?
Pop the hood?
Pop the hood.
Don't get me wrong, I did feel bad for the guy, but there was really nothing I could do. It's just a shame that videos like this didn't exist back then. This all could have been avoided. So if you know of anyone looking to buy a Civic from this era, especially an EM1, send them this video and they'll know exactly what to look for. Using my old car as an example, it's technically an SI, but Marcus could have recognized it as an EJ8 by the grille or the wheels, certainly the interior. Marcus didn't actually drive up to Canada. I told him my car wasn't what he thought it was and not to come look at it, to which he responded, "Thanks for wasting my time." And don't worry, the girl I did end up selling it to knew it was an EJ8 and she got a good deal on it. As a matter of fact, it ended up getting stolen from her and the insurance company gave her way more money than she paid me for it because they thought it was an EM1. So if you see one of these at Pete's Honest Used Cars for Sale, or if you find an overpriced Canadian EJ8 SI on Marketplace, you can just say, "Nice EX, bro."